Dear students, welcome to the class Psychology. Before we begin with the new chapter, let's see the scheme of syllabus and the marks. This is your psychology book for class 12th. We have 9 chapters in psychology. Chapter number 1, Variations in Psychological Attributes, which is for 9 marks. Chapter number 2, Self and Personality, which is for 10 marks. Then we have chapter number 3, Meeting Life Challenges, which is for marks 7. Then we have chapter number 4, Psychological Disorders for 10 marks. Chapter number 5, Therapeutic Approaches for marks 7. Chapter number 6, Attitudes and Social Cognition for 8 marks. Chapter number 7, which is Social Influence and Group Processes for 7 marks. We have chapter number 8, Psychology in Life for 6 marks. And the last chapter 9, Developing Psychological Skills for marks 6. This is all for 70 marks. And then we have 30 marks for practicals. In practicals, you are supposed to make one case profile and you have to go and administer the psychological test related to intelligence, aptitude, personality, attitude, interest, and different psychological variations and attributes. In final examination, you have to prepare one practical file and case profile, which will be for 10 marks. Then you have to have Viva for case study and practicals for 5 marks. For 15 marks in the final examination, you will have 2 practicals, 5 for the conduction and 10 marks for the reporting. For psychological testing and how do we administer and case profile, please go through with your class 11th chapter number 2 very thoroughly. Now, let's start with the chapter number 1 of class 12, which is Variations in Psychological Attributes. So when we start with any chapter, always understand what is the meaning of the chapter. As we see variations in psychological attributes, there are 3 main words which explains about the chapter and what we will study in this particular chapter. As you all know, variations means changes or the differences in the amount of something or the level of something. For example, intelligence. You may be finding your friend more intelligent or yourself more intelligent. Some people find some students more introvert, others more extrovert. So there is a variation in personality, there is a variations in intelligence, there is variation in attitude as well. Then the second term, psychological. As you all know, psychological means the mind processes and the behavior. So we'll study about variations in the processes, mental processes, as well as different behavioral processes or different behaviors of the human being. As we see the third word in psychology, that is called attributes. So when we say attributes, it means the qualities or it means the features of something. So here, variations in psychological attributes, let's see what we will understand by going through with this chapter. So number 1, you'll understand different psychological attributes on which people differ from each other. Number 2, you will also learn about different methods that are used to assess these different methods of psychological attributes. Number 3, you will explain what constitutes intelligent behavior or what is the intelligence behavior and how does it vary from person to person. You will learn how psychological assesses intelligence to identify mentally challenged and gifted individuals. So as you see in your surroundings, there are some people who are below average, there are some people who are above average. So we'll also understand how we can assess these people who are differing in intelligence scale. Then we'll also understand how intelligence has different meaning in different cultures. Therefore, understanding the cultures you have already studied in chapter number 4 of class 11, which we will go through in detail. And the last but not the least, you will also understand by reading this chapter what is the difference between intelligence and aptitude. So let's begin with the meaning of individual differences. So before we say individual differences, as we say the variations, so there are variability is a fact of nature. In nature, you will see every individual, everything, every animal or bird have different kind of variety. They vary in terms of their physical features such as their height, their weight, their strength, their hair color and so on. They also vary along with psychological dimensions. They may be less intelligent, they may be more intelligent, they may be dominant, they may be submissive, they can be creative, they can be outgoing, they can be introvert, extrovert, etc. The list of variations can be endless, and because of this variability, the beauty comes in the nature and the world. If we are not varying from each other, the life will be very dull and boring. Let's go through with the next point, which is the individual differences. So when we say individual differences, the individual differ basically based on the way they behave, the way they think. So if we define individual differences, which means distinctiveness and variation among people's characteristics and behavior patterns. So every individual has their typical way of behaving or characteristics. There are some psychologists who says that it is not only the human beings behaves based on what they are having the characteristics or personality characteristics. They also believe that because of the situationism or because of the different situation which influence the human behavior. So, so situations are very very important in order to understand the complete behavior of a human being. So according to situationistic perspective, they say that human behavior is result of the interaction between the external as well the internal factors. So external factors in the environment and internal factors of the human being, and that is the result of interaction between the situation and the human behavior. So let's go through with the second meaning or the second point which we will discuss in this chapter number 1, which is called assessment. As we have seen that different human beings vary on different psychological dimensions. How do we assess them? How do we measure them? How do we get to know or what is the degree of variations among human beings? So when we say assessment, assessment is the first step of understanding different psychological attributes. So assessment refers to the measurement of psychological attributes of individuals and their evaluation, often using multiple methods in terms of certain standard of comparison. So we have to have the comparison as we have already discussed and studied in chapter number 2 of class 11th, the norms. So we have certain standard or the norms against which we compare or we uh, assess the individual variations, and we also have studied different methods. So now here we will explain different methods of, we will also understand, I'm sorry, all the arrangements at home we have done for your learning, so that at home you don't only just be scared of coronavirus and just watch TV and movie and waste your time. We are making our efforts to make you learn sitting at home because you are not able to reach to the school and we are not able to have the normal classes. Okay, so here we were discussing about the assessment. So as you know that assessment is basically a measurement, right? How do we measure? And it can assessment can be of two types. it can be of formal assessment and informal assessment. When we talk about formal assessment, there are different methods to assess formally. For example, there are psychological tests, there are interviews, there are case studies, we have experimental methods and all, and there we have informal assessment. So when we talk about formal assessment here in psychology, especially the chapter number 2, we will only talk about formal assessment because informal assessment does not have the scientific backing. So although we do use informal assessment, like suppose if you come to the class and you see a new teacher of particular subject, you will be assessing her personality, you'll be assessing how intelligent she is, how much knowledge she is having or not. So that comes all in informal assessment, whereas in formal assessment we use different methods. So let's see what are different methods of psychological assessment. So assessment of different psychological attributes. So before we move on to the psychological assessment, let's see what all we will study, or what all different psychological attributes or domains we will study and assess in this particular chapter. Number 1, we talk about intelligence. So in this chapter, we will talk about what is intelligence, how human beings vary from one person to other person in terms of intelligence, and how culture or the nature influence the intelligence and its way of functioning. So when we define intelligence, David Wetzler's very famous definition of intelligence is the global capacity to understand the world. It's individuals' global capacity to understand, think rationally, use available resources effectively when faced with any kind of challenges in his or her day-to-day life. Right? Then we talk about aptitude. You'll be hearing this word very often when we will discuss in this particular chapter. So when we talk about aptitude, it is the basic nature or basic innate ability of an individual to do something better than the others. So in other terms, we can say it's individuals' underlying potential for acquiring skills in a particular field. How it is different from intelligence. So when we talk about intelligence, it's basically a general capacity of an individual to understand the things, to do the reasoning, whereas aptitude, it's innate potential. Suppose if I ask you, can you sing? Many of you will raise your hand and others will not say, no, I don't know how to sing. But if you hear me correctly, if I ask you, how many of you know how to sing? So you all can sing. So that is the potential, or that is your general intelligence or general capacity to sing. But you may not sing very well. So if people who are singing very well, they are having natural innate potential or natural ability, which is called aptitude, right? So if we have those people who can sing averagely and who can sing very well, and if we give the training to people of these two groups, who sing well and who sings very well, who will be performing better? I'm sure your answer will be a person who is already singing very well. If we train them, they will reach to a very higher level. So that is a aptitude. The third dimension of psychological attributes which we will study in this chapter is interest. Interest of a person is basically a preference. It does not show that your innate potential or your talent. It is just basically what you like, what you do not like. And your liking can be influenced by the society and the environment in which you are born and brought up. So interest, but definitely it will affect the way you do the things, because if you are not interested, even if you have potential and the intelligence, you'll not be doing very well in that particular subject. So definitely interest also matters a lot in order to function in your day-to-day life. Then comes the fourth point, which is your personality. When we talk about personality, it is a relatively enduring or permanent characteristics of a person that make her or him distinct from others. So when we say relatively permanent, the term means it does not stay uh, fix. It is not a fix. It is changing. It's a dynamic in nature. And when we say dynamic in nature, it does not change in, and when we say relatively stable, because it does not change in 1 or 2 days or 1 or 2 months or 1 or 2 years. It takes time, and it's the process is very slowly. You will not be able to even realize at times that how it has changed. So it's relatively permanent or enduring characteristics or typical way of behaving of an individual, which is known as personality. So in the next chapter, you will study about personality and how do we develop the personality. And the fifth attributes which we will study in this is called values. Till now, when you hear the word value, most of the time the value comes, immediately the word comes moral values, or the ethical values. But here the value means simple, your enduring belief about an ideal mode of behavior, like how you should be behaving in a particular situation, or what do you value in life. Many of the time people have the value for time, so they'll be very disciplined, they'll be very punctual, reaching to the time, reaching on time to the school or to the meetings and other situations. Some people value money, so they will be very protective about that. Some people value their clothes, so they'll be very possessive and they'll not be sharing. Every person has different values, and it is not only your ethical or moral values. Anything, as you hear the word value, value means anything which you have the given the importance to that particular thing or phenomenon, so that is value. So these psychological attributes, we have studied about intelligence, then we have studied about aptitude, interest, personality, and the values. Now comes to the assessment. So once we know these are psychological attributes, and there are many others which we will study in different chapters, like attitude, the social cognition. So I'm sorry. So when we talk about assessment, so once you know that these are different psychological attributes, intelligence, how do we assess the human being on these different variations or these different attributes, right? So the first method which we most often use to assess the different psychological attributes is psychological tests. As you know, as we have already studied in class 11 chapter number 2, make sure that chapter number 2 you remember, revise again and again, because that is going to help you in your practicals and understanding all the other chapters and psychological tests. Psychological test is a standardized tool. It is an objective measure of an individual's mental or behavioral characteristics. So when we say objective, objective means if two or more people measure the same thing, they reach to the same conclusion. So there is no subjective biases, there is no subjective interpretation of the tester or the evaluator will come in the way, right? And when we say standardized, standardized means it has certain procedures which needs to be followed irrespective of who is administering that particular test. If I am administering that test, or if some other psychologist is administering that particular test, both or all of us have to follow certain basic criteria or basic procedures which we cannot vary. So that means standardized and objective way of assessment. and these are objective. These are and there can be projective tests. Projective tests we will study in chapter number 2 of self and personality. Then comes the second method, which is called interview. This also you have already studied in detail in which chapter? Chapter number 2 of your class 11. So please go through with that and you'll understand the linkages between the previous class as well as in this class, as well as linkages between two chapters. So when we talk about interview, you all know that it involves seeking information from one person to another person, or it can be from a group of person to one person, from one person to group of person, and vice versa. There are different four methods which you know, right? Number 3 comes with your case study. This also is given in your chapter number 2 of class 11th. So when we say case study, it is an in-depth study of individuals in terms of her or his psychological attributes, psychological history in his or her context, and as you know the context in which situation he is born and brought up, as well as his psychological and physical environment. So when we do the case study, we know about the individual, in-depth study about that particular person. When did he born, how was born, in the hospital or at home, what was the developmental task he has achieved, what he has not achieved, which school, at what age he has started in the school, what was his behavior, how is his behavior with his parents, his friends in the school, with the teachers, how is it, if he is working, what is the occupational history, how many jobs he has changed, what kind of jobs he wants to have. All these information about a person, or in detail information about a person, is known as case study. And case study does not mean it can be happen only to the individuals. We can have the case study about particular institution, as well as like some institutions, or maybe like some people, group of people, or individual as well. Then comes your fourth method, which is known as observation. As we have studied observation, there are different kinds of observation. Observation is basically involves employing systematic, organized and objective procedure to record behavioral phenomena which is occurring naturally in real time, or it can, as we have already studied different types of observation. It can be controlled observation, it can be naturalistic observation, it can be participatory observation and non-participatory observation. In observation, we need to have, number one, what is the problem, because there can be so many behavior which is happening in and around you. So you have to decide, out of all these behavior, what is the behavior I'm interested in observing, right? So once you decide, okay, this is the behavior I want to observe, you decide the behavior and then you start doing the recording, because human being cannot remember each and everything in detail. So in order to remember everything, you have to jot down some notes, or you have to record. And then comes the third stage, which is called analysis, right? So after deciding which behavior, you will record and then you will analyze that particular behavior. Then comes the fifth method of assessment, which is known as self-report. As the name suggests, self-report means reporting self. Suppose if I give you some task, or if I ask you how is your behavior, so when you write a report about yourself, when you tell about yourself, that is a method called self-report. Many of the times when we give the questionnaire to you, you are reporting or you are telling about yourself through writing, sometimes through the interview, right? So we have 5 methods to assess any kind of psychological attributes. Let's go through and repeat this, and then the next topic we will take in the next class. So let's go through what we have studied in today's class. Variations in psychological attributes, we have started this chapter number 1, and it has weightage of 9 marks. right? And in this we have understood what is variability, why the variability makes us beautiful, why the variability is there in the nature, what is the meaning of individual differences. Then we have discussed what are different psychological attributes, which is intelligence, personality, aptitude, interest, value system, right? And then what are the methods of assessing these psychological attributes? Again, we have 5 methods which we have discussed. Number 1 is psychological test. Then we have interview. Then we studied about case study, observation, and self-report. So 5 psychological attributes: intelligence, personality, interest, aptitude, and values. And same 5 methods to assess these psychological attributes, which is psychological test, interview, case study, observation, self-report. Thank you so much. See you in the next class.